Hello and welcome to Earn the Right, a podcast that explores the personal and professional journeys of the world's most influential leaders. We'll go behind the scenes to see how visionaries find their calling. I'm your host, Apoorv Agarwal, a serial entrepreneur and AI scientist who spent the last decade building dream teams and commercializing AI. In each episode, we uncover the crucial decisions, risks, and revelations that have shaped these leaders, not just in their careers, but in their character. Today, I'm extremely excited to welcome Joel Moser. He's the founder and CEO of First Ammonia, which is building one of the world's largest green ammonia plants in Victoria, Texas. He's also advising NASA on a study that explores the use of green ammonia for air travel, which of course, as you can imagine, is going to change the world.
AI can help us with every single element of that. It's a new industry, it's a new product, it's a new market. The dollars spent before the closing are the hardest dollars to raise.
Joel, I'm so excited to have you. Thank you so much for making the time.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, Joel, you've had such an incredible career. You started your career being a lawyer. You've been an investor. You've been a teacher, an advisor, and now an entrepreneur. And I'm really excited about today's conversation because we'll chat about energy. We'll talk about renewable energy, which is so important given everything that's going on in the world today. We'll talk about AI and how AI can impact all of these initiatives. But before we get into all of this, would love to hear your story, how you transitioned through many different roles and pivoted and found your way into this world of, green ammonia.
And it's not a short story, but I will tell you that yes, as a New York kid, I was drawn to Columbia University because I didn't want to leave New York. I was at Columbia as an undergraduate, and my parents vacationed in the northern Adirondacks. I was walking on a country road in the winter when very few people went up there. It was a warmer day. I was wearing my bright blue Columbia University sweatshirt. And there was a fellow cross-country skiing in the opposite direction. And he stopped me and he said, "Oh, you go to Columbia?" And it turned out that it was the state senator for that region, Ron Stafford. And of course, he thought I was going to be a constituent, not a kid from the city on holiday. And he went to Columbia Law School, and he was on the board of visitors of Columbia Law School. And he was very passionate about Columbia. And he said, "Well, let's stay in touch. Let's stay in touch." Some years later, after I became a lawyer, I was a young lawyer, and I was working in infrastructure, not surprisingly, which is sort of the largest envelope of my career, infrastructure of one form or another, and projects in his district. And I checked in on him, and he had moved up into leadership in the New York State Senate. He was quite an important person. And he said, "Well, let's work together. Let's stay in touch." He became an early mentor. Essentially, through my exposure to him and my work with him, I had an opportunity to see inner workings of New York State politics and New York State government at the highest level.
And this is what year?
The story starts in 1976, and now we're talking about the early 80s. The early
Wow.
80s as a young lawyer. I had an opportunity to meet Carl McCall, who also had been a state senator from a very different district. He was at the time running for a special election to be state comptroller. State comptroller is a job that most people don't really think much about. It sounds like a boring job. But the New York State comptroller is the sole trustee for the state pension system. At the time, $50 billion. Now I think it's about $350 billion. So as the sole trustee, it makes him essentially one of the most important and powerful investors in the world. He was running in a special election, and I had an opportunity to join his briefing team. And I thought, well, I'll just brief him on infrastructure, which is sort of within the portfolio. But no one was volunteering to brief him on pension investment, which was, I had come to understand, the most important thing that the state comptroller did. So I decided to learn about pension investment to brief him.
Mm-hmm.
And I did. And I guess I did a good enough job because he asked me to help him with his testimony. And then after he was elected successfully, I became his transition counsel. Pro bono, because I was still in private practice and supporting a family as a young lawyer. I was in my early 30s at the time, and I started to be invited to serve on boards, museum boards, the board of the Alliance for Downtown New York, which is the business improvement district for the Wall Street area. A step forward in exposure, knowledge, and learning about the city and the state and how it works. Following the 9/11 tragedy, I went to see the secretary to the governor and said, "How can I help?" And he said, "Well, go see the director of the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation, the LMDC, lots of acronyms in government, which was the umbrella organization for rebuilding." And I became the infrastructure counsel to the LMDC. long before the buildings went up that we see in the skyline, there was so much infrastructure that had to be rebuilt. So many different trains, subways, commuter rails are now once again underneath the World Trade Center, and they all feed into it. It's now the Calatrava rail station. It's quite beautiful. I then became counsel to that board. Again, that brought me to a level of recognition and exposure in the city and the state a step further forward. A few years later, it was announced that the New York City baseball teams were going to each build a new stadium, the New York Yankees and the New York Mets. And I have to admit, I've never been much of a sports fan. But it was interesting because those would be two of the most interesting and challenging infrastructure projects to be built in my city. I knew the family of the owners of the Mets because I was on a board with a member of the family, Jeff Wilpon, and I was selected to be their counsel. And it wasn't a matter of connections or knowing the right people, although that was necessary. I was very qualified because I'd been doing just exactly the kind of work that would be needed to build that project for now, at this point, 20 years. And I served as their counsel, and we managed to get those transactions closed. And all of a sudden, I found myself in great demand for speaking engagements around the world about infrastructure finance and infrastructure development. And it was an interesting change. I went from laboring sort of quietly as a lawyer to suddenly people wanting to hear my voice and have my thoughts. What I decided to do was start to write. I started a journal, the Global Infrastructure Journal, and decided that rather than just speak at commercial conferences, at industry conferences, it might be interesting to teach. And I thought that maybe that this would be interesting for students. But I had been contacted by some folks at Columbia Alumni Association as a graduate of the college. I had always been interested in SEPA when I was a student there. I didn't quite understand what SEPA was, what is international affairs. And I was invited to teach. This was about 15 years ago now, and I had never really taught before. So that was an interesting challenge. And I've been teaching ever since. I've been teaching the same class each year, but it's never the same class because the students are always different from all over the world. And I get as much from them as they could possibly get from me. Teaching at Columbia has now brought me back to the university, and the university is always giving. At the university, not only did my new title of professor continue the way in which I was in demand. So I was asked to be an expert advisor to the World Bank, the World Economic Forum. By that time, I had become a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and I was asked to serve on committees, including a committee on transatlantic investment. I co-wrote a paper for the Brookings Institution. But I was introduced shortly after teaching there to Jason Bordoff, who had just come from the White House and had been asked by Columbia to start an energy center. 13 years later, the Energy Center is perhaps one of the most important voices in energy policy globally. I've been on the board since its formation. I'm on its executive committee. Being around the thinking and expertise around the Energy Center helped shape my thinking about the direction of my career. So about 10 years, 11 years ago, when I finally took the leap to leave the practice of law, something I had been contemplating for the previous 30 years, but didn't quite find the right off-ramp, I started an investment platform called Aquamarine Investment Partners. I was fortunate to have as my partner and backer a family office of the royal family of Brunei, which had been my client in private law practice. And we focused on energy transition, of course, infrastructure more broadly, but specifically energy transition. Informed by my association with the Energy Center, we invested in a number of projects, including a project in low-carbon methanol, which introduced me and us to the world of blue and green fuels, which brings me finally to a decision to reform my company about 5 years ago to become First Ammonia, to double down, triple down on investing in green ammonia, which I think is one of the most exciting areas of energy transition. So that's where it starts and that's where it ends, at least to this point.
Wow, that's fascinating. Like, who would have thought? I found your story to be extremely coherent as you laid it out, but as you just look on LinkedIn, it feels you went from a lawyer to an investor to an academic, then an entrepreneur. But this all makes so much sense. As a lawyer, your involvement in infrastructure was, let's take New York Mets Stadium as an example. You were advising on getting this deal financed because these projects are massive, from that point of conception to early development, getting to final investment decision, and eventually execution, and then operation. Yeah. It's a very long life cycle. So your involvement in such infrastructure projects was of what kind?
Almost always around finance.
Okay.
So I started my career as a finance lawyer for infrastructure projects. That's essentially what I've done my whole career, although the kind of infrastructure and the financing structure has shifted, not only with the development of my career, but in the way that the world has changed. But beyond infrastructure planning and decisions about which infrastructure to build, once let's just assume there's a moment that something or someone has decided to build a certain thing. A key ingredient, not the only, but feels like the only, is where to get the money to do it. And so money drives infrastructure as much as it drives so many other things about human life. So it's about how to make the capital arrive at the right moment. So whether you call it an FID or closing, as we used to call it, or funding, but for that capital to be there, to be ready to start construction, more often than not, the elements of the project are what provide the framework for the funding. So many projects are what we call project finance. There's not a deep pocket separate from that project that's reaching into that pocket to pay for the money. The project itself, its own revenues, need to support repayment of the capital for that project. So in doing project finance, we have to essentially be involved in every element of the project, its construction, its operation, how it's going to generate revenue, where that revenue is going to come from. The kinds of projects that I've done have ranged from how people show up at baseball stadia, for example, to how water flows through municipal water systems, power generation, power distribution, you name it, water, energy.
How about subway?
Subways, yes, yeah. Subways, transportation structures, rail lines. I was involved briefly with the early stage development of the California high-speed rail system, which is still not where it should be. Infrastructure projects often take decades, very frequently years. Much happens. The public often doesn't know what's going on until there's a groundbreaking and a ceremony. And then sometimes there's some random criticism about some element of it. They have no idea what's gone in behind the story, what the backstory of that project is before it starts to happen.
I mean, if there's one person who's seen the evolution of New York, that's you. So we should do another conversation just on New York and, how you've seen New York develop and evolve over all these years. But for today, I mean, the focus is green ammonia. It's energy, it's climate change, it's green ammonia. What does it mean? What is ammonia? Why is it green? And why is it important? Why should we care about it? Just starting from Green Ammonia 101.
Green ammonia is ammonia, NH3. It is nitrogen with hydrogen, and it's the same chemical substance regardless of how it's produced. Green is one of the ways that the industry characterizes its source. So let's go through some color coding. There's gray ammonia, which I also like to call conventional ammonia, which is how most ammonia in the world is made today. And by the way, a lot of ammonia is made today, 200 million metric tons each year. It's the second most produced chemical in the world. Most of it's used as fertilizer, and also the rest in the chemical industry, refrigeration. Pretty boring stuff most people don't really care about. It's made by taking methane, natural gas, out of the ground and stripping the hydrogen from the carbon, emitting the carbon into the air as carbon dioxide, then combining that hydrogen in a process called Haber-Bosch with nitrogen from the air. So already you have a sense that this is not particularly climate conscious because there's carbon being emitted.
That's right.
Then there's what's called blue ammonia, which is a similar process, except instead of emitting the carbon dioxide, it's captured, CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, and or storage. And so in theory, at least, it's more environmentally sound because the carbon is, in theory, at least, not emitted into the atmosphere. Green ammonia is different. Green ammonia is electric ammonia. Green ammonia is ammonia that's made from renewable power. How do we do that? We take water and renewable power and use the renewable power to separate the hydrogen from the oxygen, and we're emitting oxygen, not carbon. So there's no carbon emission, there's no carbon used. The power is renewable. So it's from wind and solar and hydro. We combine it with nitrogen from the air to make ammonia. So it's really simple. Water, renewable power, wind, solar, hydro, and air makes green ammonia. Why is it important? The simplest way to think about this is that green ammonia is a chemical battery. And all the things you would use a battery for, both big and small, are the reasons you would use green ammonia. We use batteries for things that are simpler ways to use energy, like to move cars around, for example. We also use batteries to store energy. We all, at least most of us listening to this podcast, probably know that a challenge of renewable power is its intermittency. The wind's not always blowing, the sun's not always shining. And I think most people understand that renewable power, to fulfill its expectation, requires some form of battery.
Mm-hmm.
Well, traditional batteries, heavy metals, require mining, which is environmentally damaging, is expensive. Ammonia is a chemical battery made from water and air. Here's an interesting analogy or a way to think about it. If you could bottle the wind, or bottle the power of the wind, or bottle the power of the sunlight, that's a cool thing. And that's what ammonia is. And it's the simplest way, a solution to the challenge of converting human activity from fossil fuel-based to renewable power-based. It fills a gap. It fills a need. It takes renewable power to a place where the wires can't go, like on ships and potentially planes and trucks and cars. It helps you move power from one place in the world to another, places where there's more wind than you need to places where there's not enough wind. It's a chemical battery.
Yeah. Wow. That's fascinating. And so, once I was chatting with actually the original founder of Tesla, JB, and he was talking about for Tesla to produce even like 500,000 cars a year, the amount of lithium it would take at that time was basically all of the lithium that's in every device that we're using around the world.
Yes.
So nature kind of puts a hard cap on how many electric cars can be out there. Just to better my understanding about it being a chemical battery, do you think like this could power something like cars? It can be used as a constant source of energy that could be on our streets, and it can be safe and everything, theoretically speaking?
When we started our company, we also had a division called First Ammonia Motors.
Mm-hmm.
We have spun it off as a separate company. But First Ammonia Motors just last month demonstrated a conventional, a regular truck driving on an ammonia-fueled engine, which First Ammonia Motors has developed and is patented.
Wow, fascinating.
Listeners, watchers, if you were to look up First Ammonia Motors, I think that there's a video that's housed on that or located on that site, which shows the founder of that company, James Wald, who is a storied NASCAR engineer who has now developed a fully operational passenger automobile ammonia-fueled engine.
Oh, wow. So it can be used as...
Absolutely.
Amazing, incredible. Just to clarify, I've been hearing about wind energy, for example, and someone was telling me actually the bottleneck to harness wind energy is not so much the wind source, even though it's intermittent, it's not so much the wind, but it's the battery that's needed to store all of the energy that's being produced. The batteries are actually the real bottleneck to harness wind energy. So could your chemical battery, green ammonia battery, be used in that context for saving energy? Is it a battery?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Much of the United States power grid today has a significant amount of renewable power on it, but it's intermittent. And so there's what's called base load, which is conventional power, usually natural gas, which fills in the gaps. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries and another Japanese company, IHI, have developed ammonia-fueled turbine generation systems. So if you think about renewable power, highs and lows, well, the highs means there's more power than is being used. Well, during those highs, produce green hydrogen and turn it into ammonia. Ammonia can store essentially indefinitely at moderate pressures. And then during those lows, rather than burning fossil resources, you can use the ammonia as the power source. In a perfect world, our grids will be powered by renewable power with ammonia as the balance, as the storage. It gets recharged essentially when there's extra, and discharged when there's not enough.
Fascinating. And right now, the extra energy that's just being wasted?
In some places, the grid operators pay the renewable power systems to shut down because there's too much. It's wasted, yes, but it can be stored as ammonia.
Yeah.
It's converted to hydrogen, but hydrogen is an expensive, explosive chemical to store, to transport. Ammonia can be stored and transported at moderate pressures and temperatures. It has essentially the same physical characteristics as propane. So if you've ever had a backyard grill with a propane tank or seen a suburban propane tank behind a store, that's as simple as it is to store ammonia.
Ammonia, yeah. No, that's incredible. And in terms of, I know like transportation, safety, those are some of the other key factors one has to take into account as we're thinking about renewable source of energy. I have no idea if green ammonia, how stable it is, if it can be transported easily, if it's safe to have green ammonia batteries in our cars.
Well, those are three different questions. I'll answer all three of them.
Yeah.
It's very stable. It's essentially stable indefinitely. It's safe to transport. Of the 200 million metric tons of ammonia which are produced and used each year, about 20% of that moves across the ocean in ships. The safety is a different question. Ammonia is toxic. If you took a great big deep breath of ammonia, it would probably kill you, or if it didn't kill you, it would injure you meaningfully.
Wow.
But in the 100 years of use of ammonia as an industrial product, and again, it's 100 years that synthetic ammonia has been produced and used, there have been very few industrial accidents. There are safe handling protocols. Petrochemicals, petroleum fuels are flammable. Hydrogen's explosive. Ammonia's toxic. They all have issues around their use. Certainly, ammonia as an industrial fuel is perfectly comfortable. People are properly trained how to use them. In fact, the global shipping industry has begun the process of converting to ammonia as a fuel. The International Maritime Organization is moving forward with a process to impose what is essentially a global carbon tax on global shipping, which uses the dirtiest fuel called bunker fuel. Most of the major shipping companies, shipbuilders of the world, are building ammonia-fueled vessels. The safety protocols, both on board and in port, are being developed currently, and safe handling is very important. But this is currently happening. Many ports of the world have ammonia storage and people don't even know it. They call it fertilizer, but there are ammonia tanks in many of the ports of the world. In the Pacific Northwest of the United States, ammonia is used as a direct fertilizer, injected directly into the ground, and farmers drive great big tractors dragging ammonia injection systems, injecting it into the ground. The farmer is perfectly safe. He's upwind of any possible ammonia cloud. So it's got a 100-year history of safe use and handling.
And so I've heard you mention like shipping a few times. So is that as you build your plant in Victoria, and as you think about production, as you think about use cases, is that sort of the first use case you're going after?
First use of the green ammonia being produced in the world today is probably going to be the simplest application, which is replacing conventional ammonia with green ammonia in countries which are imposing low carbon standards on industry. Hands down, latter part of this decade will already be happening. The first new use case that's really fascinating is in shipping. The IMO regulations start to ratchet up the carbon tax in the latter part of the century and into the 2030s. And the global shipping industry is already in the process of beginning the conversion. They're building the ship engine companies have developed ammonia-fueled ship engines, and people are now fabricating ships which will sail on ammonia. The difference is not just the engine, it's how the fuel is stored. Since ammonia is a gas and goes up and it's toxic, the fuel will likely be stored above deck as opposed to bunker fuel, which is stored below deck. Many modifications, but these ships are currently being used, so it's really quite exciting. Global shipping will be the first major new use.
Outside, I mean, it can be a battery, wherever ammonia is being used, it's better to use green ammonia, but it sounds like it can also be used to transport hydrogen, which is fascinating. Yeah,
exactly. The European Union is developing a hydrogen strategy with hydrogen pipelines, and there's hydrogen import terminals being planned. The hydrogen import terminals are ammonia import terminals with big ammonia crackers. The hydrogen will arrive in Europe as ammonia and be cracked back into hydrogen.
Wow, fascinating. Well, I want to talk about the big, beautiful bill. How can we not talk about that if, when we're talking on renewables and climate change and so on? So I know you had been following the bill very closely for the past few months, and congratulations. Sounds like everything has worked out well for you. But I'd be curious as, layperson who doesn't fully understand all the nuances and so on. What were some of the aspects of the BBB that you were looking for, and how did that happen, or what does that mean?
So I think the best way to answer this is to talk a little bit about the history of our company, because we are a first mover or an early mover in not just green ammonia, but even green hydrogen. We planned for our first project to be in Germany, and we went to Washington a few times and participated in industry groups, as did some of our colleagues, our commercial partners. The engineering firm from Denmark, which is our technical partner, our partner in our project in Victoria and actually globally, participated in a very major way, along with many other industry organizations. At the end of the day, the hydrogen tax credit survived the big, beautiful bill. It was the time during which projects can be started was shortened. The deadline to begin construction is the end of 2027. We'll be well underway by then. So we were the only ones kind of crazy enough, stupid enough, reckless enough to keep on pushing forward during this several-year period of uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
Smarter people, more reasonable people tapped the brakes or pulled out when this uncertainty about the regulations evolved during 2023.
Yep.
We just pushed forward. I don't know whether it's because I'm compulsive or because we didn't know what else to do. We had invested a lot in many different ways in this project. We had other projects and still have other projects around the world under development, but we pushed forward. So this is not me saying it, but according to an article in Bloomberg New Energy a couple of weeks ago, there are 5 projects in the US that will be able to take advantage of what's called the 45V credit, the hydrogen credit. 2 of them are pure hydrogen. One of them is eSAF, sustainable aviation fuel. One of them is a green fertilizer product. We're the only green ammonia project for export. Others may use this extra 2 years to jump in. It may not be enough time. We may be the only green ammonia project that is able to actually take advantage of the Inflation Reduction Act. And I will tell you, it is unlikely that we'll build another project in this country. We're advancing our plans for projects in other national jurisdictions. We're back to looking at Scandinavia because Northern Europe has got significant renewable power resources. I will tell you that we're looking at a project in Southeast Asia. I probably shouldn't mention the country. Not so hard to figure out if you know my bio. Asia will be a big part of this industry. The 2 places that will matter initially for new shipping fuels will be Singapore and Rotterdam. Those are the 2 places that are moving forward, have the infrastructure, have the will and the foresight to move forward.
Wonderful. And you mentioned the BBB. There were other forms of renewable that were more affected. Which forms, like solar, wind?
Solar and wind. So solar and wind have enjoyed a production tax credit for many, many years, a couple decades perhaps. And that production tax credit is being eliminated. I think the deadline is being under construction by the middle of July of next year. So it's a disruption. So my industry is tiny.
Yeah.
It's new. We believe it's going to grow, but at the moment, my industry is tiny. The renewable power industry in the US is huge.
Of course.
So it is being hugely disrupted because the entire economics of renewable power in the US revolves around the production tax credit, not because it necessarily must, but because it has historically. And so you take an industry that has economics built around a certain kind of a tax subsidy and suddenly end it, well, that's going to be very disruptive.
What I failed to understand, so I was chatting with a very senior executive at Nextera. He was very clear. He was like, look, we need all forms of renewable energy on the table right now. If not, we're going to see blackouts, not like 10 years from now, until 2030, which was quite concerning. And then this doesn't quite line up with, the BBB or efforts in general to bring all the renewables to the forefront. Like, can you see this? I mean, like if we don't embrace renewables, do you see blackouts till 2030?
Yes, I do. And I'll tell you why. First of all, we need all the power we can get.
Especially with AI.
Especially with AI. And even before AI, with just the demands of conventional data centers. The conventional growth of the use of data centers, but now with the exponential growth around AI with the hyperscalers. The production tax credit has been the significant factor in how renewable power has been developed. Ending it will stop the development of many renewable power projects in the pipeline. And because it's existed for so long, the grids in many parts of this country have come to depend upon the contribution that renewable power has made to their stability.
I see.
Particularly, by the way, in Texas. Taking it out of the equation is going to lead to the risk of power outages. We already experience power outages in Texas, for example, and it is often renewable power which is the most reliable form. But now look at the issue about needing more power in general and specifically for AI. The fastest power that can be stood up is renewable power, much faster than conventional power or nuclear. Yeah. Nuclear is a decade. Yeah. Even small modular reactors, which I've grown quite familiar with, most of a decade. Solar can get up in a year. Now, there is a bit of a misunderstanding. A lot of people in Washington will say, well, the only reason renewable power exists is because it's subsidized. It's not true. The only reason it's been adapted so quickly is because the subsidy has encouraged its adaptation. But there's straight up economics for renewable power. But the industry is going to have to now find those new economic pathways forward. And again, we need all the power we can get. All of the above used to be a policy of the government. It's not all about energy transition. It might be about energy addition. Again, even if you're not philosophically committed to decarbonization, as I am, but you understand the need for energy abundance, why would you not want to encourage all forms of energy? Some might say, well, renewable power gets a special subsidy the taxpayers pay for. Well, so does conventional fossil power. I mean, there are so many subsidies in existence which support the development and deployment of fossil power. We don't even notice them because they're just part of the underlying economics of our nation.
Yeah. And just a very basic question, potentially a stupid question. I mean, one would think between fossil fuels that are adding a lot of carbon to the environment versus renewable forms of energy, I would think between the two, renewable would be the obvious source of energy. Why are we not meeting most of our energy needs using renewable and using fossil fuel if and when needed?
Well, we absolutely should.
Yeah.
I mean, let's start with the fact that climate change is real. It comes from human activity. It comes from the use of fossil fuels emitting carbon into the atmosphere, something which we should all want to curtail as soon as possible. It can't happen overnight. The entire point of encouraging the development of renewable energy with a production tax credit was to expedite, or at least encourage the development of renewable power to increase the speed in which we're able to transition to renewable power. It's really quite simple. The rest of the world gets it. I think just a couple of days ago on Tuesday, the UN Secretary General gave a speech in which he said the U.S. is missing the boat of the greatest economic opportunity of the century, which is renewable power. He said it's unstoppable. He's right. It's happening as a global trend. Everyone knows it. That's where China's going. That's where India's going. That's where Europe already got to. The United States is going backwards.
Yeah. I mean, the crazy thing is we want to be number one in AI. And sure, when we talk about AI, we talk about data centers, we talk about chips. But if you zoom out of everything, AI is extremely energy hungry. To me, it feels it's not the race of AI is based on the race of energy. And so it's a no-brainer to be, persevering to be number one energy producer in the world and continue to grow our energy production exponentially as we think about AI. But that is very counterintuitive, honestly. If development and everything we're doing in AI comes down to energy, then hey, let's go. Let's produce exponential amount of energy.
And it's not just any form of energy. It's power. Yeah. It's electricity.
Yeah.
This whole concept of the U.S. being energy independent, which is a very complicated misnomer where the energy systems, even the fossil fuel systems of the globe, are interdependent. But AI doesn't need oil. It doesn't need gas. It needs electricity. And renewable power is an easy, ready form of electricity. It is intermittent, but that intermittency can be addressed. Currently, it's addressed with baseload from conventional power. In the future, it can be addressed with baseload from ammonia. Batteries, ammonia as a battery.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see, every data center with a primary source of energy being a solar farm next to a data center, and then everything being stabilized using, these chemical batteries. It would be, I don't know, conceptually makes a lot of sense.
Conceptually makes sense. We had a conversation early on in the development of our company with one of the hyperscalers, I won't say which one, on this very topic, particularly their desire to put data centers in developing countries for a lot of reasons. Because they want to put them there, because there's a need for them there, but the grids are unstable, and they're committed to decarbonization. And so how do they address the intermittency question of renewables to power data centers, which need a constant source? And the answer is really very simple. We can develop a stabilization system, an energy storage and utilization system on the basis of ammonia side by side. You can imagine an energy park in a given country where there's significant development of renewable power, more perhaps than is needed most of the time by a data center, during which time ammonia can be produced, can be used as a backup battery for the data center, and perhaps even enough to export as a product. The development of the renewable power can also help power the local grid. So many wonderful things. AI, far from being the enemy of renewable power development, can develop with renewable power side by side.
Wow, that's an amazing thought. It feels like AI has obviously increased the amount of energy we need. It's probably quadrupled the amount of energy we'll need in the near future. So in some sense, AI has gotten us in, this mess. And I want to talk to you about how AI can help us get out of this mess. And if you think about projects, right, it's a very long life cycle, all the way from commercialization to feasibility studies to front-end engineering design, which takes a lot of time, but is at the heart of how the project, how well the project will be executed. FID, then there's execution, there's commissioning, and eventually operation, right? So there are three kind of, or the way I'm looking at it is three major portions, which is development, getting to FID, execution, doing the actual construction, and then eventually operation. So I'd be curious do you see avenues where AI can come in and help? And do you feel, or do you see AI can help us with all these parts or any of these parts as we think about the project lifecycle?
AI can help us with every single element of that. When I talk about the development of green ammonia, hopefully I make it seem simple, but it's actually not simple. It's a new industry. It's a new product, at least making it green. It's a new market. We're inventing everything from scratch. The number of times I'm in a conversation with a builder, a technical partner, a banker, a lawyer, and someone says, well, that's never been done before. It's like, I know, because that's almost nothing that we're doing has ever been done before, at least the way we're doing it. And so lots of challenges, lots of human ingenuity, and lots of hours of work by engineers, by experts. But it's kind of not rocket science. There are very clear solutions to problems that AI can support or just do. So let's break down the steps. Getting to FID. So the first thing is to getting to FID in the way that we will finance our project, because we are not ExxonMobil, we're a project company, means that we need all the elements of the project to be in place at this moment that we call a closing. Some call it FID, which means, among other things, a full feed design, feed front-end engineering and design, the designs for the layman of how this plant will be built, an EPC, engineering, procurement, and construction, a construction contract for the layman of how this project will be built. And let's just stop with those two elements for starters. The feed, depending on the size of the project, can cost from a few million to tens of millions of dollars. How could it possibly cost that much? It's because it's thousands and thousands of hours of engineering work to put together all the detailed design elements to build this chemical plant. Well, I'm absolutely certain that AI can do at least many elements of this, and perhaps in the future, almost all the elements of this, without all that human labor. And I'm not trying to put all the engineers out of business. I'm just trying to get my project done on a cost-effective basis, because the dollars spent before the closing are the hardest dollars to raise, the ones that are dearest, and so the most difficult to spend, and that I have to spend let's just call it $10 million before I ever get to a place to raise the capital on the project, that in and of itself is the reason more people aren't doing what we're doing. So the ability to do that not only at a lower cost point, but in a shorter period of time would significantly expedite the development of my project and therefore my industry and the larger industry that I'm a part of.
Of course. And let's talk about timelines a bit, actually. How long does the process take to get to FID, or how long does this FEED process take? Are we talking a couple of months, 6 months, a year, a couple of years, 5 years?
It depends upon the size of the project, how ambitious, and what other kind of roadblocks. But in all of the things being equal, it's at a minimum several months and probably most of a year to get a full FEED.
Got it.
And there are some perfectly valid reasons for that. But the largest amount of that time is engineers laboring in silence, often folks that we as project developers had never met because we only meet their supervisors, lots of layers of management before the lines are drawn on computers. They used to be drawn by hand. Now they're drawn by computers. So that was a big step. Once upon a time, the industry transitioned from hand drawings to computer drawings, and now it's going to transition, I'm quite sure, from humans drawing those lines to AI drawing those lines. But even more important, and a reason why it's not a few months, but usually more like a few years, is because changes are made.
Yeah.
Why are changes made? Because the world is not a static place. Commercial elements, political elements, site developments might give rise to changes. So what might be a $5 million FEED for 6 months now becomes another $7 million for another 6 months. I've got an excellent team, brilliant people. We are constantly coming up with better ways to do what we're doing. But sometimes we simply can't implement those better ways because that's a good idea, but that idea means that now we have to spend 6 months redoing significant elements of our FEED, which are already behind us.
Wow.
Yes, the time and effort and cost in doing a FEED is perhaps one of the most significant roadblocks to the commencement of a project, why more projects are not undertaken, and why this industry, I talked about what a magnificent solution ammonia is to the intermittency challenges of renewable power. Why doesn't that industry already exist? It's because these are the challenges that people who want to get into it face.
Wow. Incredible. And you've talked about engineers a lot. So typically, like, how many engineers would be working on such a problem? Like 30, 50, 100? Because I would also think there's, sure, you could throw more engineers at the problem, but there's a, point of diminishing returns, right? And especially if there are many people digesting the initial scoping document that you probably give to the engineers. I mean, that in of itself is a huge issue. I mean, it's a 10,000 page document or a 1,000 page document. How can you possibly, how can you rely on humans to fully internalize that document and then come up with the right engineering design to build something so innovative? But then if there are so many chefs in the kitchen, how do you guarantee that information is not being dropped somewhere or people are collaborating properly? I mean, try getting 3 people in a room. Here, if 30, 50 engineers are working on something which needs to kind of, work together, how can you possibly? So I don't know. Are these some of the challenges as we think about it deeper? You see why it takes so long and things get missed in the FEED, which come up now during execution, and now project is delayed and it goes over budget?
Absolutely no question about it. It's impossible for one person or even a small number of people to have a mastery of every single element. One hopes that somebody flags an issue before a shovel's in the ground, but that's never the case. Things always happen once the work starts. And there's even more to it than that. It's not just the FEED that we're doing for our own purposes to plan and price our project. The EPC, the builder who is then tasked with building the project, is expected to give us an estimate of what it's going to cost, and to whatever extent commercially reasonable, hold to those prices. I won't get into the legal language of what some of that means. That's a whole separate podcast, but they have to do an analysis, the FEED. They have to do essentially their own FEED or their own FEED work where they price these elements. I mean, in a simple way to think of it is they're counting nails, they're counting screws, they're counting bolts. But it's much more than that. They have to figure out what it's going to cost them to procure every one of these bits of steel and pipe which go into the project, and the equipment that will take to put it in the ground, attach it, weld it, bolt it together, and the people that will be required. So that's an entire human endeavor, which itself takes a lot of time and cost. And here's a funny thing that most people probably will be surprised to hear. We pay them to do that.
Wow.
We pay them. They insist upon being paid to give us a price estimate because it takes them thousands of hours of analysis to figure out what to charge us to build our project.
Wow. And then what if this estimate is far from reality or you don't like it?
It's wasted money.
Wow.
Wasted money.
So you got to do this again.
With a different builder. And I know of a project which has been a very big project, which has gone on for a very long time, has been through 3 major builders. And each time that there's a problem with the builder for one reason or another, they need to raise another very significant amount of millions of dollars to fund the next cost estimation process by a different builder. This has got to be a process that can be simplified.
Definitely.
With AI.
100%. Yeah. I mean, just thinking about the amount of information and detail that's needed. I mean, even once the engineering drawing is complete, I'm imagining the number of different parts that would go in to building would be tens of thousands of parts. The human mind is not built for that level of detail. We could easily miss a part, or we could write down the wrong part that's needed. And now construction begins. Labor is on site. So you're spending tens of thousands of dollars a day, and you don't have the right part. So sure enough, everything is going to be off target.
And there's human preferences, prejudices about things, patterns. Much of our project is fabricated off-site. We have committed to what we call a modular feed, which is the design that significant components of our project will be fabricated in a fabrication yard off-site and then assembled on-site. It sounds simple, like Legos. It's not so simple. The decision of what's done off-site and what's done on-site, who's making that decision? I mean, there's a right answer and there's a wrong answer. The right answer, the wrong answer is driven by cost and time, but the choices might first have been made by the preferences of the human who's making that set of choices. And so we have recently gone through a process of moving items that were initially designated to be assembled on site to be assembled off site because it's less expensive and easier to do that. But why didn't we know that to first start with? Humans make mistakes, but it seems like that's a relatively straightforward critical path decision that AI perhaps might not have made a mistake. Now I know, AI is not yet to a place where it's doing these things, but AI is getting smart real fast.
Fundamentally it does have the capability to do so. It's a matter of training it on the right data and so on. But yeah, no, I mean, it's fascinating to learn that this whole process is still so extremely manual, and we know what are the things that are causing these delays and cost overruns and time overruns. But there's no standard solution out there. So that's one, like getting the feed more accurate and faster. So if someone could compress, would you say that if there was a magic wand that compresses that whole feed design phase by 50%, that would be a no-brainer for you?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look back at the point in time that I said earlier that we pushed forward when others hit the pause button, dropped out because they were waiting for the regulations for the hydrogen tax credit. Why did they pause and stop? Because they didn't want to spend the millions of dollars on feed waiting to see if the regulations are going to break the right way or not. Why we did or didn't is a separate question. Maybe AI would have told us not to, but we did. But the point is, these are the speed bumps, the roadblocks, the barriers to moving forward to build projects to make this industry, or frankly, any industry happen.
Yeah, definitely. So that's one thing, that's one use case, making the FID or the feed process faster and helping with it's not like the AI is doing the actual engineering, but if AI could make all these engineers involved much more productive and help them not miss information, I mean, that would already be quite helpful. So that's one use case. Where else do you see the use of AI in either construction or operation or any other aspect of project development?
Well, let me talk about the one that's a little bit easier because I can conceptualize it a little bit better, which is operation. So one happy day, our project will reach COD, commercial operation date, and we are converting one form of energy into another. We are converting electrons into molecules. And how do we know that the electrons we're using are truly green? Because all electrons are electrons. We're drawing them from the grid. We have virtual power purchase agreements from wind farms, from solar farms, and the regulatory framework is that we should be running our electrolyzers, the equipment which converts the renewable power and water into hydrogen, during the same hours that the renewable power generation projects are producing electrons. It's called hourly matching, temporal matching. So we need to ramp up and ramp down and run our plant in accordance with the cadences of the renewable power which we are drawing from the transmission lines. We'll have up to 4 different sources of wind and solar projects generating on or off. Windy days, windy nights, sunny days, dark nights. I hope that by the time we're operational, is completely AI operated. I don't want to imagine that there is a human with a control panel looking at the ERCOT grid of saying, oh, they're getting this, it's windy there, it's sunny, no. But it's not a simple process. There are many variables. How fast we can ramp up, how fast we can ramp down, how full our tank is of ammonia. Is there weather coming in? We can predict the wind, and we certainly know when the sun rises and sets. So the operation of our plant can and should be as completely AI-driven to the point that there should not really be much human activity or effort day to day to keep it running.
Yeah. And I mean, you said there are too many variables, right? I mean, that's what machines are good at. You throw 1,000 variables at a machine, give it data, it can find correlation between these variables very easily. I mean, this is exactly what the human mind has trouble doing. The human mind is very good at intuition, very good at connecting the dots, but we're not very good at looking at even 100 variables and figuring out how things are related. And it's fascinating to me that, I mean, at least from your vantage point, nothing like this exists. This seems to be a manual process right now.
Never been done before.
Never been done.
We'll be the first commercial scale green ammonia plant operating in this fashion. There's no off-the-shelf program. We're inventing how to do this. I hope that by the time we're up and running, we will have helped to have taught an AI how to do this for us.
Amazing, Joel. This has been so fun. I want your thoughts, like zooming out of everything we've spoken about. If there was one key message that you have for people, what should we start doing from tomorrow? Or how can we start educating ourselves about some of these things? What would be your simple key message to the world?
Well, this is a selfish answer. A few years ago, maybe it's now a decade or more, 2 decades ago, we started seeing pictures of windmills on milk cartons. And it was a little cartoonish, but it was a very good way to educate the population, the voters, the public, about the meaning and significance and value that renewable energy can play. And I think that most people get it. There are some who don't, but what I do is a little more obscure. But it's completely connected. And frankly, it's necessary because the potential of renewable power will not be realized without a chemical battery, without ammonia. Or perhaps it's going to be pure hydrogen or some other hydrogen derivative. But, I'm betting on ammonia. But I can't explain what I do to somebody without their eyes glazing over. Cocktail party. So what do you do? What's your company do? Or why is your company called First Ammonia? I wish the public understood a little bit more about energy transition, about energy addition, about energy abundance, and about filling the gaps that renewable energy in its purest form need to be filled, and that the role that ammonia can play. I wish it had a more interesting name as a chemical, but that's the message I would love to get out there, that ammonia is important. Yeah. It's not just to me. Yeah, that it can help solve a problem for humanity.
Yeah, definitely. Are you ready for some rapid fire questions?
I have rapid answers.
Okay. Let's see. So what's one misconception about renewable energy?
That it only can exist when subsidized.
Interesting.
Simply not true. But it is often the least expensive form of energy that can be stood up.
What's a unique way in which you yourself reduce your personal energy footprint or make it green?
Well, this is not unique, but maybe it's unique to the extent that how I think of the reduction of my carbon footprint. I live in New York City, and dense lifestyles are much more cost effective, less impactful on the environment, more efficient. So I like to think I'm virtuous just by the fact that I live here.
I mostly city bike everywhere. So I like to believe that's my way of contributing to the environment.
My son city bikes everywhere, and
Yeah.
I wish he'd wear a helmet. But
yeah. Okay, one thing about since you've been a native New Yorker, one thing about New York most people don't know or realize.
that New Yorkers are among the friendliest people in the world. We don't look like it when you're walking down the street and no one's making eye contact. But except for like a hospital emergency room, if I had to pick a place to have a medical emergency, I would pick a crowded New York City subway because I am confident my fellow New Yorkers will do whatever's necessary to help. There's a bond among us.
100%. Couldn't agree more. And what's your favorite place in New York?
This is a funny answer. My favorite place in New York is Bowling Green down on Wall Street, near Wall Street, because you can touch history on Bowling Green. You can touch history because the wrought iron fence that is around Bowling Green is the same one that was there when the Declaration of Independence was read out loud.
Oh, wow.
In the middle of Bowling Green, there was a statue of King George, which the people put ropes around and pulled down. And at the top of each of the vertical standards, or whatever they're called, of the fence, was a gold crown. Mm-hmm. And people broke them off.
Yeah.
And you could go down today to Bowling Green, and you can feel the rough edge, the rough top, where the crown was broken off.
Wow, I had no idea.
So as a New York history buff and as an American history buff, I graduated college as a history major. It's amazing to me that you can actually touch American history right there in Bowling Green.
I had no idea. I'm going to check it out. But Joel, this was really fascinating. I really appreciate you making the time to have this conversation. It's a very important conversation. We spoke about so many different things, all the way from green ammonia to energy to climate change to how AI can help us with all of these things. And I learned a lot. I always enjoy having a conversation or lunch with you. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Of course, my pleasure. Thanks, Joel.